So there is this idea of Shabbat being connected to Jacob, our forefather. Not to Abraham, not to Moses, not to Isaac, but to Jacob. The question is, why? What was the special connection that he had to Shabbat? It also says that there was a special blessing that Jacob had that no one else had. It's the blessing of Ufaratzta. That God blesses him and he says, Ufaratzta yama v'kedma, you and your children will flourish and kind of break out of your limitations in a proactive, powerful, bursting forth of energetic being, and you'll spread to all corners. Yama v'kedma tzafona v'negba. It's the promise that God gives him. He doesn't give that particular promise of Ufaratzta, which is a breaking out in a unlimited way, in a much more, from a much more powerful platform of realizing potential than God ever said to Abraham. God said, yeah, you'll have many descendants, but there was the lack of energy, the lack of excitement. Here it's like, whoa. And oftentimes we see that there's a connection between his observance of Shabbat and his fully embracing Shabbat and his ability to really break forth and reach the tipping point that really was the catalyst for the transition from being a very charismatic family to becoming a nation that was then poised to stand at Sinai and receive the mandate of Torah, the mantle of Torah, both its deep, profound wisdom, the gift of it, the privilege of it, and the communiques, the responsibilities, the ethical call of action, of a representation of a moral imperative in the world that was the other side of that coin, of that privilege. So that was a direct result of a full embracing of Shabbat. Now, we know that Abraham, all the forefathers, embraced Torah even before it was given. So the fact is that Jacob was particularly connected to Shabbat. And what is it about Shabbat that lends itself to that breaking out that kind of getting on a platform that launches us into a place that far surpasses our ability, far surpasses our goal, launches us far beyond our initial starting point in an extraordinary way. What is it about Shabbat that catapults us, that has the ability to catapult us to that place? And if you think about it, it actually might even seem like it has the characteristics, the reverse characteristics, Shabbat. Shabbat, if you think about it, is actually more of a embodiment of limitation, of framing things in a very limited parameters. You have to wait 6 days in order to get there. Then, once you get there, you can't do anything. You can't change the world in any meaningful way. So how is, if you think about it, it's actually kind of a major paradox. How is the embracing of a way of being that withdraws from the proactive kind of hands-on engagement needed to be a force of radical transformation? How is it that the prelude to that is withdrawing from that very mode of being? And that, going into that space, somehow primes us for its exact opposite. So there are many different ways of approaching this. One of them is best understood by this following interesting halacha, this interesting piece of Jewish law. In Judaism, there's a whole section of law that's focusing on ownership. What are the parameters of ownership? Now, conventionally speaking, if I want to sell you something or transfer something that I own to you so that it becomes yours, one would think that the most concrete way, conventionally, of doing that is by placing it in your hand, right? I take it, I put it in your hand, and I verbally express and articulate my intentions, and then I follow it up with a concrete act. So that's one way of approaching that. Jewish law has another way. It's an unconventional approach. It's almost bordering on this oblique, mystical law, but it's part of the actual non-mystical halachic world, and that is, and I'll use the Talmudic terminology. It says Daled Amos Shaladam, the 4 Amos. In Talmudic language, the measurement is the 4 cubits. So let's just say 4 feet in the immediate radius of a person constitute the person, are an extension of the person, so that if you place an item in the immediate radius of a person, the empty space around a person acts as a proxy, as a surrogate for the person, and is empowered to receive something on behalf of the person, so that if I place it in your airspace has the authority that you have. It is you. It has the same, with regard to many laws, it has the same credentials as your actual hand. And it's also the same paradox. How is it possible that an imaginary extension of you, or your emptiness, is somehow a substitute for who you are in your fullness and your actual presence? And the answer to that is the same answer for how it is that Shabbat is a preparation and a prelude to the nothingness of Shabbat, is the precise preparation for the follow-up, the empowerment of bursting forth to transform the world with enthusiasm and power and determination. So how is that? Why is that? And the answer is, in both of these areas, it's a very simple idea. Sometimes in our desire to connect with something or to achieve something, we are running on all cylinders, and we're putting forth our full energy into everything that we're trying to do. And we're so excited and so determined to achieve what we need to achieve that we end up losing sight of that which we're trying to achieve, and we end up getting caught up in the process of achieving it. So if we want to share this great idea, for example, and we have a particular audience that needs to understand it, we get so excited about sharing the idea that we convey it in all of its fullness, in all of its richness, in all of its grandeur, and getting caught up in that, the poor person who's trying to understand the idea is clueless, because you've lost sight of the student. You've lost sight of the recipient. You've lost sight of the capacity, the vehicle that the other has to process what you're sharing. So it goes back to the same idea of praying for rain, the sage that prayed for rain, and what happens? God throws down a tsunami, and this great powerful rain that ends up being destructive. And the very recipient ends up being obliterated instead of nourished. What is Shabbat? Shabbat is the place where we go to withdraw back into ourselves, into the fullness of ourselves, and we recharge our batteries. But what we also do is remember why we're here. And so when we re-engage, when we relaunch, we're suddenly looking back at our intended target, at where we need this idea or this goal to actually manifest itself. And suddenly, we're able to convey what we need to convey in the right language because we've remembered who we're talking to. And so the empty space around a person becomes a substitute for the person, because sometimes it's only by re-entering into our empty spaces that we remember why we are engaging in the fullness of our actual spaces in the first place. And we're then able to share and communicate our energy in a way that is truly transformative. So by inhabiting the empty space of Shabbat, it becomes a proxy for who we are, because it reminds us of our ultimate purpose. Our ultimate purpose is to see beyond ourselves. And when we're caught up in our actual selves, we lose sight of that sometimes. So I wish you each a happy Hanukkah and a renewed connection to sharing our individual light, our personal light, and by taking advantage of the tools that we have in order to share this light, in order to realize that blessing to Jacob of Ufaratzta, of breaking out, truly breaking out in an unprecedented, energetic way, and realizing that sometimes we have to scale back and step back, and that stepping back is not a setback, but it's a prelude to a whole different kind of re-engagement that is deeper than anything we've ever experienced before. Yom Tov.